circle for a Saturday morning meeting. So we're really happy that everyone could come here today for a meeting put on by the Center for Internet and Society and the Say No to UID campaign. So I think this is actually the first meeting of Say No to UID in 2013. Am I correct? That's the first meeting Say No to UID has had in 2013? I know, but for this year. Yeah, so this is the first meeting that they've had in 2013, and of course they're hoping to have more. And today I think we're going to try to talk about both the UID scheme and the NPR scheme and clarify some of the confusion that we believe exists out there about both schemes. I think it's very clear from news items that you can get a different picture depending on what newspaper you read or who you talk to or which official is reporting on it. So to help clarify this, we provided a background note which kind of goes through the basics about each scheme, talks about what is it grounded in? So for instance, the NPR is grounded in the Citizenship Act and the UIDAI, or the UID is just a bill right now, and try to clarify the differences and the similarities between the schemes. And then we're also going to be talking a little bit about the impact that UID and NPR will have on governance and citizenship as it goes forward, and some of the connections between like UID and this thing known as like big data. And I don't know if you guys have heard, but Nandan Nilekani often talks about the potential of big data through the UID and its ability to be adopted by different platforms and generate huge amounts of information. And he speaks about this in a very positive light, and I think we're going to discuss a little bit more about what actually does that mean by big data and what are the implications of an identity project that is creating big data about all residents in India, both in terms of your civil liberties and in terms of privacy rights, etc. So I think today, so we gave you the background note on the NPR and the UID. We also provided a cabinet note from 2010 on the NPR, which we thought was really interesting to compare what the cabinet was saying in 2010 and what's being said today in 2013. For instance, the cabinet note says that biometrics, your photograph and your fingerprints will be collected, whereas today you have your iris, your fingerprints, and your photograph being collected, which is also ironic because it's not even in the act or in the citizenship statute that those biometrics will be collected. So we'll be highlighting some of those differences. And then we also provided a note on just a quick background of what the Say No to UID campaign has done over the past year since 2010 when they first started. And both those notes are in Kannada and English. If you have any questions or corrections or suggestions, please feel free to share them throughout the day in conversation. And I think we'll start with Usha. Yeah. Who will begin?
Each of us needs to be introduced. I thought we don't need to make it so formal. I'll just tell you who I am, and I do law research. I live in Delhi. I work on law and poverty. And since this project started, I've been, well, at least since September of 2009, I've been following this project. It started before that. The idea today is to make this a workshop in the sense that for all of us, there are confusions about what this UID is, what our status is, what we need to do, what we can avoid doing, what do they know, who are these people. I don't think even the basic questions have been properly answered over these past 3.5 years. And that's one reason that some of us are saying simply no to this process, because the process itself is so deeply flawed. It's a process that's not a governmental process. It doesn't have the kind of public discussion that you can compel upon a government. Parliament has rejected it. There's a series of things that have happened, and there seems no answerability at all in this. So one reason for starting on this premise that this UID is a bad idea at this point, one reason is because It's not just about the project anymore, it's also about the process and what we are doing with the process. I'll just briefly set out some things. I'm not going to be comprehensive or anything, but just to set the tone for what our issues are, what are the kind of questions that we have. I won't repeat what's in the note, although some of it might overlap. But the idea is not to present the note. The note is already there. It's to say some, a few things that we need to consider, and which should inform the way in which we respond to what the state is giving us today. Some of those big things, some of the major things that there are. The first thing is that this is a project where the link between the UID and the NPR is really not known. Nobody tells you clearly what the link is between the NPR and the UID. We do know this much, that the NPR is in the Registrar General's office. It is with the census, the same person who deals with the census is also dealing with the NPR. That same office is also dealing with the socio-economic census. It's also dealing with the caste census. So there is a range of collection and databasing that's happening within the Registrar General's office now. And that's all in with one agency. But that's a state agency. It's a declared state agency which has certain set of rules by which they are supposed to operate. We'll figure out whether they are or not in a little while. The UID is very different in that it is not clear what the status of the UID is. The first thing, of course, I think all of us know is that there is no legal, there's no statute that either gives legal status to the UID, nor is there a statute which limits the powers of the UID, or says how the UID should function, how far it can go, where it should stop, what is an offense within this whole business of collecting data, what are the protections that exist for a citizen, how mandatory or voluntary can it be. There is nothing. Since there is no law, it's being done as it pleases the person who is implementing the project. So that's one. Now when you talk to the UID people, and this has been happening through the past 3.5 years, they'll tell you that no, we are legal, we are a legal entity because we've been set up by an executive order. And that is true. They've been set up by an executive order which is dated 28 January 2009, and they were set up within the Planning Commission. But that executive order is only an executive order. Under the Constitution, you cannot just conflate executive power to make rules and to create whatever with the legislative power of the state. Now, given the, for instance, you can have a ration, you can have a program for giving rations to people through an executive order, because you're offering a service. This is how the government implements its agenda. It's perfectly possible for them to do it. That is where they want us to. That's how they want us to view the UID. They're saying this is just just a facilitating mechanism. It's been set within the Planning Commission, and it will help us deliver services. The problem, however, is that that's not all it does. It is collecting data, it is keeping data, it's using data, it's sharing data, and it is doing it on untested grounds. Each of these has consequences. Now, all of us, I think, recognize that the way in which technology is now entering governance, it's changing the nature of the relationships, of various relationships. So, for most of us, I don't think we want that there should be no technology used in governance. We acknowledge that technology exists. We also believe that technology is a good tool. So it's not about saying no to technology. It's about saying no to certain uses of technology, which is a completely different thing. And in the reason, therefore, that it's important that the UID comes within a law is partly because of the kinds of effects that it will have, the project like this has, on people, on individuals, on communities, on peoples of various kinds, on values such as citizenship. It has huge impacts on the relationship that people have to demanding services from the state. It is intending. It's not just an incidental fallout of a project. It is an intended consequence of this project. That is the purpose of this project. So that's one reason that it cannot go without, without a law. The second thing is, if you look at how the UID was set up differently from the NPR, we'll just do a little brief on how the NPR got set up. If you look at the UID, how it got set up, in that notification, one of the significant things that's said is that the UIDAI will own the data. It clearly uses the word own. All of us know that when the state does, collects whatever information, it manages that data, it holds that data, but it does not own our data. In this case, there are responsibilities that they have, that the state has. But here, the word, for the first time, you find the word own coming into a context like this. So when we are handing over information, we are not just doing it for delivery of a service. We are actually handing over ownership of that data to an agency which is unclear. I mean, its status is unclear. And why I say that its status is unclear is because if you look at from the word go, you had the strategic overview document. Even from there, from their first document, they had a pre-strategic overview document in 2009. And then in 2010, they revised it, and that's what's up on their website now since April 2010. They talk about how after the phase when they do their enrollments and that first stage is over, they will become self-sufficient and they won't need any more money from the government. And therefore, they'll become a unit on their own. Now, I have to say this because there is really no way of avoiding it, that Mr. Nandan Nilekani is, as an individual, he's a tool in a range of things that are being done in this process. It's not, at different points in time, we've had different people being used as that tool. In this case, it is Mr. Nilekani who's the tool. It starts with the UID project as far as this process is concerned. But the UID project will say this is voluntary, not mandatory. Then Mr. Nilekani will write a report on LPG, on PDS, on whatever. Mr. Nilekani as chairperson will produce a report where he'll say, seed it. Make every database that's there, seed it with the UID numbers. Make the UID number a necessary part of how you're going to be delivering that service. So he himself, while he putting on his hat as the UIDAI person, will be saying that, no, it's voluntary, we have, this is not mandatory at all. Will then be producing reports where he says that this will be, make it a necessary part of that functioning or they can't get delivered services. Then he produces another report where he says, all this data that is emerging, these are not things, the government has a lot of data with it. The government is incapable of dealing with all this data. So what you need to do, therefore, is to create these things called National Information Utilities. It's called the TAGUP report, TAG, that's Technology Advisory Group on Unique Projects. That report is, Mr. Nilekani was the chair of that report too. And he says, they say that you create National Information Utilities. Hand over the data that the state has in its various, it collects data in various capacities, in various silos, it keeps it. It says you need to manage data better. So you hand it all over to these National Information Utilities, and then they will be, and I'm just quoting him because, I'm quoting that report because it's, there's no other way of, if I paraphrase it, it'll lose its meaning. But he says, these will be private companies for a public purpose, and acting in the public interest. And they will be profit-making, but not profit-maximizing. So if this is not just a twist of language, I don't know what is. So there is a very clear line that we can see between the ownership of data by the UIDAI, the lack of any kind of clear status about who, and if you look at the bill that was produced in the middle, in 2010, they introduced a bill after a lot of pressure from all of us. And when that bill came on, what that bill essentially said was that this will be a statutory body independent of everyone else and it will deal with everything internally. Even launching a prosecution when my identity, there has been a fraud on my identity, the only person who can launch that prosecution will be the UIDAI. So that bill was only going, what it did essentially was to give all the powers that, it just gave powers to this agency. And there was no, there was no protection really that existed for any of us. And then you have the National Information Utilities coming in. So it's important to understand this because when we first noticed the significance of this was when in the Parliamentary Standing Committee report, the report says that the National Informatics Center had made a representation to the Parliamentary Standing Committee telling them that they had been saying from the beginning that a database like this that is created should be held by the government. It's only when we heard that we realized that it's not being held by the government. It's being held by some other agency. And who this agency is, just because it sits inside Planning Commission, Planning Commission itself is difficult to have any control. If you look at what the Planning Commission can do, it can plan, it can suggest, it can do a lot. It cannot do anything that will violate our rights of any kind. Whereas here, the UIDAI, because of the kind of data it collects, because of the kind of convergence of data which is intended, this convergence of data is not an unintended consequence. Tracking is not an unintended consequence. They are saying we'll be able to track people wherever they are and be able to deliver services to them. Basic thing is they can track. So these are things that you cannot do without some kind of statutory protection for citizenry. And that simply doesn't exist. So that's the UID. The NPR, it's after the Kargil, when the Kargil Review Committee came in, constantly they tell you that Kargil Review Committee 2000 had said that you need to create a national citizen database. That is not correct. It did not say that. What the Kargil Review Committee said was that in the border areas, because you have this problem of infiltration, to be able to handle that, they just in passing, they said you could perhaps give the people there a national, a card which is a local card which will tell you that they are Indians, they can quickly show it to you. Maybe that will help you check infiltration. It was a passing comment. There was nothing more than that. And they did not suggest. No, okay, Matthew disagrees with me. So perhaps, just say it now, Matthew. It's a workshop. You don't have to. Okay, I think we have two different, we've read it, I don't read it like that at all. Yeah. Yeah, so I think what we should do is each of us read the document ourselves because we have two different interpretations of this. But it did not say that you must have a national population register. I think that much is clear. To give, yeah. Okay, so that we are agreed on, the rest we are not. On the ID card, so they did not ask for the creation of a national citizen register, but that was used. You keep referring to the Kargil Review Committee to say why we are creating this nationwide database of citizens. So it doesn't come from there. Then where does it come from? It came during the NDA regime when there was this, on the one hand, Kargil was on the Pakistan side, but they kept talking about Bangladeshi illegal migration and kept using that as the reason why they wanted to have this national citizens register. The 2003-2004 amendment to the Citizenship Act introduced the concept of the National Citizens Register and said that you can have this, you create a National Citizens Register in accordance with the rules that are made under this law. The rules that were made under this law, which is the Citizenship Rules of 2003, very clearly gives you 15 fields of data. There is no 16th, 17th, and 18th. There are 15 fields of data. It does not include biometrics. In 2003, when they were making those rules, biometrics was not really being thought about, as it was only about ID cards. It was whether you have, and in the coastal, the MNIC, the Multi-Purpose National Identity Card, was started. It was all along, they said the coastal region is one place where you need to do it. You need to do it in the border areas. Essentially, to begin with, we start there because we need to be able to check infiltration. Now, after that, they have not amended the rules, and for me that matters. I'm a lawyer by training, and it matters because I find that when a state believes that it can violate the law and doesn't have to care about what the law says, I think we really need to start worrying, because it means essentially that they believe in the rule by power and not by the rule by constituted power. So when we talk about the Constitution, why we keep referring to it is because the Constitution is about the limits of power of a state. It's not about the powers of the state. So that distinction is now getting wiped out. That's the first thing. Second thing to remember is that when the National Population Register, it was meant to be done simultaneously with the census exercise. So when they started the census exercise, many of you might have found that they were also taking the names and addresses down separately. And at that time, the intention was only to collect that because they were only going to register people who were ordinarily resident in India, which meant that, over a 6-month period, if they came back to you in 6 months' time and they found that you were still there, then they would include, then you would be part of that register. So the second time was an important part of that exercise. But what happened in that second time part of it was that by then the UIDAI had come in and they had decided at the end of 2009 that they were going to have fingerprint initially, and then after the report, biometric committee report, that they would also include the iris scan. And it's important to know why. Initially they only thought of the photograph and fingerprints. When their biometric standards committee went into this exercise and looked at the fingerprints, they said this may be inadequate for you to be able to enroll and deduplicate everybody. So the uniqueness of each person may get lost because the fingerprint may not be sufficient when the database is so huge. So then they went on to the next stage and said, all right, maybe you want to try iris technology. Maybe you want to try it. They did not recommend it. They said you could try it. Possibly your accuracy level would increase if you also had iris scan. So it's important to remember why and to know that they did not know anything about it in 2009 end. 2010, they issued, and that's a very important document for many of us because I actually couldn't believe my eyes when I read that document. In 2010, January, February, they issued a notice to an invitation to a consultant to do biometric testing in the country. And that document, it's on their website, you can just go there and find it. It's in their archives. You'll find that it says basically that we have no information about the viability of biometrics. We don't know whether it'll work. It's never been tried anywhere in the world on this scale. It's never been tried in India. There's no part of the developing world where this has been done. And I just want to pause there to say, remember that there are many places where people do collect your biometrics. But whether they deduplicate it and they use it to authenticate you is a completely different thing. They might use it as additional evidence if they need it at a certain time. But whether that is sufficient for them to identify a person, it's not been done anywhere as far as I know. So in India, that document clearly says we have no idea. And they say that the National Institute of Science and Technology in the US has been working on this biometrics over the years. And after some 10, 15 years, they've come up with basic kind of stuff, and that's it. So just in brief, and we can have a number of questions on this after that, there have been 3, 4, 5 reports since then, each of which shows the failure of biometrics, the failure of the potential of biometrics, and not its incontrovertibility. So I think we need to spend a little time on that to understand why then is the UIDAI just pushing ahead, and why is the government pushing ahead with this? The other thing to remember is that the UIDAI initially was only meant to be the back office of the National Population Register. It was meant to do, it still is meant to do that. It's still meant to do the, whether it comes from the National Population Register would collect this data. And then there were other public databases like ration and whatever, food and civil supplies. They were to deduplicate that, which means that the technology was to be provided by the UIDAI, not the sociology. Whereas what's actually happened is Mr. Nilekani is a man in a hurry, as was this government in 2009. So when he took over and they set up this cabinet committee on the UID, that committee authorized Mr. Nilekani to have the UIDAI do the collecting of that data, which meant that he got into MOUs with a large number of people, including state governments and banks and various kinds of PSUs, and started collecting data. Now, if any of you has gone to these enrollment booths and watched how it happens, you'll know the complete chaos that prevails in these places. It's totally outsourced. In fact, he prides himself on this, that they have a very, very small group which works for such a large project. It's a very small group that is the core group. Everything else is outsourced. So as it happens, where it happens, and if it happens, it happens. That's it. And in fact, one of the things, just one thing to mention, and you'll find many things like this, the biometrics committee had said that, if you don't enroll it properly, which means that you might get an enrollment, you might get a fingerprint, but if it's not enrolled properly, then when you go in for authentication or when you go in even for deduplication, there could be problems. So you have to be very careful how you enroll biometrics if it is to work at all. And at that time, they weren't even sure it will work even then. And you go to the enrollment stations today, you look at the kind of systems that there are. It's important to remember that the NPR process today is being delegitimized by the UIDAI, which includes Mr. Nilekani and supported very strongly by Montek Singh Ahluwalia, who was saying that stop this NPR process. Give everything to the UID and let them do all the enrollment, because they can then get as many numbers as they can onto their enrollment index. They'll get a large number. Then we'll worry about whether deduplication is actually happening right or not. We'll worry about whether re-enrollment is necessary or not, which is one of the things, by the way, which can happen. Every 2-3 years you might have to re-enroll if you get into the system, because biometrics change. Whether they are unique or not is still not known, but it's definitely known that biometrics change. Your fingerprints change, your iris changes. And if you look at their iris report, they say they start with the assumption that iris never changes, which is about the most absurd thing. But now there has already been a study that has come out, which in Notre Dame University, which clearly shows that iris doesn't just change, it changes within 1.5 to 3 years. So we are talking about technologies that simply don't work. An agency that was set up to do the back office work of the NPR, today trying to take over from the governmental agencies and make it their own. So that's the broad background. I think we'll be having a lot of discussions on the cash transfer, governance, and all those issues. So I won't say that now.
That? Should we go on to Anand's topic?
And actually I made a mistake. I should have said it in the beginning. I think you should just stop at different points and raise the questions. Because this is not, I'm sorry I went on the way I did. Should have
No.
what if you
fine.
don't register? Yeah, so you want to get on with that?
Uma has a question.
Yeah.
Which I have a question. One is when the UID data and the
no.
NPR data were being collected, I think it was 2010. So I was already registered with UID and I said I'm not going to give you any data. Now legally, I would be, if I didn't give the NPR data, I could be arrested for that reason because I didn't give the data. Finally, I gave her some basic data. I said, you don't have to know whether I have a computer or whether I have a laptop, all that rubbish. Now, I'll just give you this basic data. Now, there was confusion also in the fact that they tried to mix the two when they brought the form. She came back twice to my house. Okay? And the second time I gave a little more information. Because then by this time I got yelled at saying, if it census data, you can't deny it. So anyway, that's one thing. Now the other thing is that, can I just address that in here? Forget that.
See, the national population requires you to give those 15 fields of data. They can't arrest you if you don't give it. And in this patriarchal society, you're not the head of your household. The head of the household will have to pay 1,000 rupees fine. So you don't have to worry about it. But there is no arrest under that. However, it's significant that it's since 2008 that the state has started passing laws where they are saying that if you do not give information that the state asks of you as a person, they can punish you. This didn't exist before. Till 2005, when 2005 the RTI Act came in, the state could be punished if it did not give citizens information. They're shifting, and it's really made them insecure. So one of the reasons they're beginning to penalize us, which is the place now where they're saying that if you have Bombay, that in the training program that happened, the secretary went there and told the RTI, the PIOs, that you have to, if anyone's making an RTI request, they should now append the UID number to it so that we can do a background check. So this is like a backlash on the RTI thing, partly. But in the NPR, you only have to give that 15 fields of data. Actually, the government is illegally collecting biometrics. Under the NPR, when the law says that you can only collect according to the rules, the government has no right to collect beyond the rules. Now, if they were to add, it doesn't take very much for them to add these two biometrics to the rules, but they don't even bother to do that. That's the level of arrogance today. They haven't bothered to amend the rule to include biometrics. So today, and if they did, then there are other challenges to it because I think it goes beyond the parent statute, but that's a different question. Actually, till now, all the collection of biometrics under the NPR is illegal. And that's something that, it's up to us whether we are going to demand that a state act legally or not. I mean, I think we have to.
Is that illegal?
Legal because it says that this is the only way you can collect it. And therefore, since biometrics is not mentioned there, they have no right. They are wrong in, it's not just that they have no right. They are wrong in collecting additional information because it's beyond the authority of law. And the law says you will do it only in this way. With Nilekani's project, since there is no law, anything goes. Actually, the difference between these two is one is it's illegal, the other is that it's not bound by law. And that's what he's banking on. They've actually been, they are not keen at all on having a law because it allows them to do anything. Today when they are saying that data has got stolen, laptops with the data get stolen, then it's all wrong. The computer got corrupted. Now there is no consequence to any of this because there is no law. If you don't have a law, there is no offense, there is no wrong, no? It can only be a civil wrong for which it's too complicated for you to go anywhere. So this is precisely the confusion that comes because in NPR, they are bound by the law. UID, there is no law at all. So the battles are different.
So what I'm asking is that precisely the reason that it doesn't have a legal solution.
No. In fact, the idea of voluntary, in the NPR is not voluntary. The NPR, you have to give information as is asked under the rules. And that is, it's mandatory. The UID, registering for the UID, is supposedly voluntary. So what they've done, therefore, is to say, I am the UID AI. I'll give the UID number. That's not my fault. I am not gas cylinder man. But actually, it is Mr. Nilekani who wrote that report which said make it a part of this delivery of LPG. So it's a lot of lies and fraud and half-truths, which is why people are confused. The second thing to remember is that, see, when they started, the UID was not supposed to collect data at all. Then they were given authorization for 10 crores. Then they said, no, we'll finish this quickly, so give us 10 more. So they got another 10 crores. While that second 10 crores was going on, before the 20 crores got over, the Home Ministry came up with a thing, and by then the Parliamentary Standing Committee had delegitimized not just the law, but the project. It said, take it back to the drawing board. There are too many problems with this project. Of course, they didn't do that. But in January of 2012, Mr. Chidambaram, who was then Home Minister, went on to the thing to say that, listen, your collection of data is so insecure that we can't use that data. It's useless for us. So we have to do the full exercise anyway. Then Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia comes back and then suddenly there is a rapprochement and they are sitting there and saying, okay, you take 50%, you take 50%. Now it's up to us as a citizenry to figure out what questions we ask of it. If it is insecure, if you actually watch the UID process, there is no process. You have one document, if they accept it, it's fine. There is a verifier, there are introducers. There is nothing that the agency itself takes as responsibility to ensure that you exist, that this is where you live, this is who you are. Nothing. Unlike the census exercise where they come door to door, here you have to go rush, fall over yourself and stand in a queue, and in the Bombay example, for instance, it's from 3 o'clock in the morning to get yourself enrolled, or you may not get your rations, you may not get your LPG, whatever. So there's a huge difference between the process in these two. But they decided to share it between them. This is not, there is neither law nor logic nor governance in this structure. So, I mean, that's the fact.
The basic difference from what I understand, the UID is purely profit making for the agencies involved, which can get data on it, but claiming to be that they're going to clean up the duplication system. So when he says you take 50% and you take 50%, what exactly is Ahluwalia trying to say? UID is insecure data. It's taking everybody. At first it said we're going to start with the poor, rural poor, then urban poor. Now it's like middle class. If you don't get it, you don't get your rations. You don't get your gas. You don't get your bank account maybe frozen. You won't get your railway. Now the latest thing is railway bookings are going to be on UID. So where is it? It's slowly creeping up to a certain population in the UID, and it's stopping probably at the middle class. It's not going to catch the people that are above, which is they don't want to track themselves.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It continues to be primarily that because of the link up with the UID, they are also talking about having, that this data can also be used for various other things, whatever. The difference, see, one thing to remember is that the UID was never meant to give anyone a card. They talked about it on and off in the middle, but it's not an identity card. So the idea is that they should be able to identify people. Whoever the agents, that's why I'm saying come in, because it's a wholly governance-oriented thing. It is not a, the rhetoric is that you get your identity, you get an, you can, actually that rhetoric has no basis at all in the project, because the project is about people being identified by somebody else, by governance structures. That's one. The second is, I think, Uma, in your thing, if we were to just keep the, recognize that the interests are multifold. I mean, it's not even just security and even talking about delivery of services, because it's not only about companies making money, whatever. It's a range of ambitions now. And I think one of the things that's worrying many of us, including you, I know, is that since data is the new property, the idea that who you are, and it's creeping up in all kinds of ways, because yesterday we had a discussion on the DNA profiling bill, where they want to database people on the basis of their DNAs. They want to have DNA profiled databases of whole populations, of communities. They're actually talking about it openly. So in one sense, we are not just dealing with a UID and an NPR, we are dealing with the idea of databasing citizens and the possibilities that technology is offering. So are these technologies things that are manageable? Can they be monitored? Is it a good idea to have, to allow this kind of databasing? Because one thing, it's very interesting that when they started with saying this is, it'll help you. So come and take it because it'll help you. To realizing very quickly that if you look at their graph on their website, you'll find that enrollment was at a certain level in the beginning, and then it just slumped. It wasn't a great level. It was Maharashtra, Andhra, and 2 or 3 states, they had a slightly higher level. And then it just slumped. When the slump came, they started pushing for threatening people with exclusion from various kinds of things. So it's not like, it's a business model, that's all. No? It's like you've got to push people to buy certain things. So when you were asking, how do we respond to this? If Anand is not here.
This is fine. Let me just quickly introduce myself. My name is Anant Maringanti. I'm a geographer. I run a small research program in Hyderabad called Hyderabad Urban Lab. Hyderabad Urban Lab, and it's part of it's a program that's run by a small foundation called Right to the City Foundation. I'm mentioning this for a little more reason than just giving my own identity. I believe that there's a peculiar kind of urbanization happening in India right now. There's a certain sort of re-territorialization that's going on in this country, which makes it very necessary for us to think about urban centers in a particular way. So the constitution itself has to respond to the urban centers in a particular way. Data relates to the urban centers in a particular way, so on and so forth. So I feel that a lot of the work that I do, a lot of the things that I think about come from that understanding that cities are important places for politics, important places for entitlements, and so on and so forth. My interest in the UID, I'm entirely with Usha in spirit, and I really appreciate all the details that she has given. For me, it's always been like, it'll be great if we can actually have 100 unique IDs for those 100 people who are involved in creating this UID, so that we can easily start tracking what they're doing. Because it's becoming actually very, very difficult to track what each of them is saying and doing. The issue that Usha has just raised, which is that it's said that it's voluntary, but the same person who says it is voluntary tells somebody else to make it mandatory, right? And it seems like there's no contradiction at all between the two. And then it's supposed to be about uniquely identifying individuals with foolproof biometric data, and then suddenly you find that the same authority actually had to blacklist a company for having produced some 35,000 UIDs in excess of the actual population in the area, right? Which means that they've actually invented people. In Andhra Pradesh, we have seen UIDs actually being given to things like um, coriander, right? We actually have biometrics for the coriander plant. So, so, so given, right, right. So given all of these things, I do think that it's really,
Just one fact. It's not by the number of people you enroll. It's by the number of people who you enroll who are given a number. If the number is not generated, you don't get money. So Kottamalli, come on.
Not only Kottamalli, there is a hen.
yeah. So there was also a hen somewhere, and I mean, I think we've seen a lot of very interesting.
We are all Gurgis.
Yes, we have seen a lot of very interesting stories emerging in our state, which is supposed to be leading the way in doing the UID. I mean, this is actually something very interesting about Andhra Pradesh. We are also supposed to be the state that has implemented social audits very, very effectively. And in lots of places, people have been digging water tanks where there are not supposed to be any water tanks. They have redug water tanks. So we've been doing all kinds of things, and Andhra Pradesh is generally considered to be the model state for a lot of things, including revolution on the one side and including corruption on the other side. We do all sorts of things, and we excel in all of them. Getting back to this issue of UID and my own involvement with it, the reason why I'm saying that while I'm in spirit with Usha and I appreciate all the detail that she's given, my own take is slightly different. It's not in disagreement with what Usha does. It's partly because of the pathway through which I arrive at the UID. Right? I was first very excited about the UID in 2009, and I wrote an article on the UID in the Economic and Political Weekly. The reason why I was excited about it was because as a political geographer, I thought this was a great opportunity to think through a lot of issues that are very rapidly emerging in the Indian national context, issues that were never there before that. And I felt very impatient at the fact that the academic world was just not paying any attention to what was going on. The issue to me was that you have a country which was in 1991 accused of giving up its sovereignty to the IMF, right? It's rapidly losing its sovereignty, which is desperately trying to regain some kind of political sovereignty, economic sovereignty, so on and so forth. So there's a push to create something that is supposed to be a powerful nation state while it's actually giving it up. This goes hand in hand with a context in which people are much more mobile, and the mobility of these people is throwing up all kinds of problems for the market, for the state, for all kinds of agencies. People being mobile has become an issue. Now, in this context where the citizenry, the territory itself is constantly in motion, and a nation state in the flux of globalization is trying to partly give up its sovereignty and partly reclaim it in some sort, how does it actually manage to do it? And to me, the UID was one instance or one manifestation of a very, very problematic, very troubled attempt at resolving this. And I saw the UID actually as a very peculiar formation of governance, in the sense that it's not coming from the sovereign nation state at all. Its origin is not in the constitutional mandate. Its origin is in a particular neoliberal civil society formation in which business actors and technocratic and bureaucratic individuals work very closely with powerful people in governments. So you form a network that brings out this. Now, what do you call this? Is this governance? Because theoretically, governance is the situation where you've moved away from government, where you have the business, where you have all sorts of other actors sharing the act of governing a territory. So in some sense, it is theoretically, conceptually, by definition, this is governance. But what kind of governance is this? What should our political stance against or vis-a-vis this should be? And to me, in so much as this has to do with the mobility of finance capital, was something that actually had to do with, was something that we should actually take a very strong stand on. In the sense that one of the big pushes for UID comes from the housing industry. It comes from microfinance, where you have people who are constantly borrowing money and moving away. Borrowing money and not paying, not being able to pay is a different matter. But the problem, as they see it, is that these guys are taking money from us, they're moving away. They're part of this, the self-help group, the thrift society, so on and so forth. They have gone to some other place. How do we track them? And it's a problem that comes to them at a moment when they actually thought that they had got a grip on the monies of the poor people, right? I mean, we have known historically that big banks in India have never given money to the poor because it's difficult to take it back, right? It depends on a variety of local relationships of trust. It's only a local money lender that can lend money successfully to the poor people. So banks would not do that. But then what happens is that in the 70s and 80s and 90s, we have developed the social technologies for microfinance to work. We have formed groups of 20 women each, and we have taught one member in each of those groups to keep accounts. And we have taken away the chitti, which is a kind of rotating credit systems that people had, turned them into a modern banking formula. And the key thing here is that the accounts are all kept locally initially. It's the one woman who is the coordinator of that self-help group which keeps it. Then they get federated. As they keep getting federated, it becomes possible to actually move data from one place to another, right? You can kind of put together 500 women, you can put together 10,000 women, and the monies can be calculated upon. As this begins to happen, digital technologies move in, it becomes possible to actually consolidate the accounts of all of these people. And instead of talking about 500 women, we can talk about 50 lakhs. Right? That 50 lakhs will be the transaction between two agencies. Below that, it will be done locally through these networks. Now, once you have something like this, if people from one local area are moving to another, you have a serious problem. And in Andhra Pradesh, we have seen instances where the agents would chase these people to other places. They shame them publicly, so on and so forth, right? And it leads to suicides and all kinds of problems. It's in that kind of a context that when the Reserve Bank is trying to extend banking operations to the rural areas with mobile devices, so on and so forth, it becomes very important to be able to identify each individual and the various transactions over a period of time in one single account. Right? The same thing happens in housing and so on and so forth. Now the issue, I think, as it is slowly emerging, is getting resolved into two peculiar problems. One part of it is that this issue of being able to aggregate the transactions, string them together over a period of time, see them across places, so on and so forth, can actually be used in a very enabling and empowering way. In the sense that if someone moves from a village to the city at this point of time, he loses his ration card. Right? He's not any longer eligible for the subsidies that he's eligible for in the village. Right? If there's a way to connect up his presence from the village to the city and then redesign your PDS inventories to deliver it to the person who should be eligible in different places, it can be a very enabling kind of thing. It can be a very enabling thing for people, social scientists, for governments, for policymakers, if we can actually know without a huge time lag how people are moving. Right now, the census people will not give you migration tables 5 years until 5 years after the census is taken. It's a political decision to start with, but it's also a technical problem. They don't know how to give it. So today, if I want to know how migration patterns have changed based on 2011 data, 2011, 2010, 2011 census data collection, I'll have to wait for 4 or 5 years more. It's only then that I will know where people have come from to Hyderabad city, or how long they have stayed there. How long they have stayed there is actually very, very difficult even to track. It can only be done through national sample survey. And even national sample survey is not going to be very reliable. So in some sense, there is great excitement at the possibilities of turning this into something politically enabling, if we can think through how to do it. There's excitement about the kind of insights that we can actually generate from the data that it gives us. And there's also a tremendous amount of anger at the way in which all of this politics is not coming together to take on the big issue of how this is being pushed through a very, very problematic formation at the national level, right down to the street level, where the center is set up by a local company through personal networks of patronage, and then does something really, really ugly and horrible. And that has been going on all over the place. So this is one set of issues. The second set of issues where I think it's very, very problematic is that sure.
Standing and so on. But this is also N of 1 tracking. Right? And that is particularly important because not only would you be tracking, there's no anonymity anymore, right? So suppose someone is an HIV positive patient, and now if you can link it to an ID and then, and that goes with the health record, right? You actually know that, and all kinds of discrimination can then ensue. Yeah. So I think it's a little bit more than just migration. And I think, this is where we should also be looking on the other side at privacy, non-discrimination acts, and so forth from a constitutional perspective. What are the protections, right, that are in place? And, you were talking about genetics. Now, in the US, for example, I think it's very clear that who owns the genetic data is really the individual. And the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act in 2009 basically states very clearly that as far as employment is concerned or insurance is concerned, there is protection. So I think, clarification on both issues from the point of view of data and from the point of view of protections of the citizen, I think would be.
ಗಮನಿಸಬೇಕು. ನನಗೆ ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಆಧಾರ್ ಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಏನು, ಅದು ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಬೇಕು, ಅದು ಕಂಪಲ್ಸರಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾ, ಮಾಡಿದರೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೋದರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಐಡೆಂಟಿ ಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಬೇಕು. ಮಕ್ಳಿಗೆ ಮಾಡಿಸ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೋದರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಸ್ಕೂಲಿಂದ ಸೈನ್, ಟೀಚರ್ ಸೈನ್ ಬೇಕು, ಇಲ್ಲ ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಮಾಸ್ ಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಬೇಕು. ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಏನೂ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಇದೇ ನನಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ, ಪ್ಲೀಸ್ ಅದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹೇಳಿ.
The Aadhaar card required, and just for getting the Aadhaar card there are other identities required, and people have to give the teacher's signature for the children. Or marks card.
I was thinking what we can do is that after this quick round is over, we'll do the questions that are arising in this and how do we address them today, today's questions like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to leave in 10? Okay, in that case we'll...
First of all, it's a very funny chicken or egg situation. The Aadhaar card is not mandatory. It cannot be made mandatory. There is no Aadhaar card. So that itself is false. And you should fight it out. Otherwise, you will be drawn into a trap. The second thing which you notice is that the so-called UID scheme is supposed to detect and weed out fake identities. Now, for enrolling in UID, you are accepting any one of the 14 so-called fake identities. And I have asked in RTI, how many fake identities have you found? They say it's not their job to find out fake identities in ration cards. That's not their job. I've asked in RTI, how many duplicates have you found? They said they have found 77 lakh duplicates as of that date. And out of that, then I have asked, what action did you take? They said they simply discarded one of them. In other words, there's a duplicate. So answering the lady's question, one, it's a ridiculous situation where they say that this is a unique identity which they are giving you. They're not giving you a unique identity. They're taking your identity and using other identities to check up which they say are fake, to check up whether your identity is true or not. So it's a totally false thing.
See, question is, I think part of the question is also, what do children do when do they need an identity? Should they get it? How do they get it? No? Today, if you look, the government is trying to force it. So are you asking, is it voluntary or mandatory? It is supposed to be voluntary, but they are forcing you to get it. That is correct. So children cannot refuse. If they want to go to school, they can't say, I am not going to do it, whatever. But actually it is a very defective system. So parents have a and have an opportunity also to ask the school that, okay, if we give this information and we go there and we bring you the card, who will be liable if the child tomorrow is not recognized as being the person who they say they are? If the child till the age of 16, they say fingerprints will keep changing. For everyone it changes, but for children it changes faster. So actually fingerprint doesn't work for children. But they're taking fingerprint and saying, now come, on the basis of this we are going to. So you ask the school, we can help you put together a set of questions that you will ask the school. Let the school take responsibility, or let them send this to the UIDAI and let the UIDAI take responsibility if anything goes wrong. It cannot be, nobody knows that this technology will work. When they are looking, they are saying for children, this technology will not work. Deduplication. They have said 70 lakhs.
For children below 5 years, it has not worked. No, it does not work.
But Usha, I think her question also is asking, they have to go to the school to get some information as one of the items. But they're requiring it not from the school. So why should the school is now going to go and ask these people? They're asking them to get an Aadhaar card.
No. The school is now told, in fact in a number of the interviews that we've seen, the schools are saying that you can't sit for your exam unless you have your
In Kerala, enrollment has been made compulsory.
Yes, and EWS.
School station. She is not saying that the school is requiring the cards.
Okay. In which case, why are we worried? I mean, what is
ಯಾರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಆಧಾರ್ ಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ?
ಈಗ ಆಧಾರ್ ಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಯಾರು ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ?
BBMP ಆಫೀಸಲ್ಲಿ.
This is BBMP.
ನಾನು ಮೊದಲು ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದಂಗೆ ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಆಧಾರ್ ಕಾರ್ಡು ಕಡ್ಡಾಯ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಮತ್ತು ಕಡ್ಡಾಯ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಆದರೂ ಕಡ್ಡಾಯ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಟ್ರೈ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಗುರ್ತಿನ ಚೀಟಿ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಆಧಾರ್ ಕಾರ್ಡು ಗುರ್ತಿನ ಚೀಟಿನೂ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಈ ವ್ಯತ್ಯಾಸ.
I'm saying there's two agencies that we need to ask. We need to set out these questions.
No, I was just translating what he said.
I'm saying the thing is that when I think Sudhir Wombadkare had the problem on his pension, we sent him a set of questions that he asks the agency which is asking him to give the Aadhaar card to them, and to give it to the people who are giving him the Aadhaar to. I mean, who are supposed to give it to him. So we said, you write to these people, to the pension people, and ask them all these following questions. If my UID does not work, if 1 year down the line it stops working, then what are you going to do about it? Who is liable if there is an identity fraud? If somebody takes away my identity and uses it somewhere else. Suppose somebody does an identity fraud which lands his child, an EWS child, in trouble. Who's going to be responsible for that? You tell me, you fix these liabilities, just inform me. I'll go and get my UID. I'll get my child to get the UID. But you please answer me this, because without these, this is not a secure identity for me.
ಈ ಥರ 5-6 ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳು ನಾವು ಸ್ಕೂಲ್ ಅಥಾರಿಟೀಸ್ ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ ಕೇಳಬೇಕು. ಅವ್ರು ಏನು ರೆಸ್ಪಾನ್ಸಿಬಿಲಿಟಿ ತಗೊಳ್ತಾರೆ.
Sorry, my name is Vince. I'm from Kenyeri. But I was surprised to see people standing in queue. Yeah. And then we are running all.
It is not an Aadhaar card.
No, I'm telling you.
Identity card
See,
illa.
You can tell all those people, but they're not going to listen to you. At the end of the day, they'll just go out and do it because.
We are answering a particular point.
No, I'm telling her also.
So we can ask the questions to the school authorities
No,
and to the UID.
That is the problem. Her question is not the school authority. Her question is BBMP was insisting that she has to get an Aadhaar card. And she's saying that she has to go to the school to get an ID from the teacher to sign off.
Can I just make some quick comment? See, I think I think it'll actually become very easy if we understand that when Nandan Nilekani says that this is voluntary, he is saying that all the government agencies and companies and so on and so forth are not legally required to make this mandatory, but they can voluntarily make it in their hands. Right? No, I think
ಇರಲ್ಲ ಏರಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದು ನಾವು ಏನೋ ಒಂದು ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಇರ್ತೀವಿ, ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಅದು ಏನು ಅಂತ. ಬಟ್ ಆದ್ರೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಹೋಗಿ ಕ್ಯೂನಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂತಿದ್ರೆ ಇದು ಮಾಡಲೇಬೇಕು, ಇದು ಇದ್ರೆ ಇದು ಬರುತ್ತೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ, ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಇದು ಬೇಕು, ಇದ್ರೆ ರೇಷನ್ ಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ, 11,000 ಒಳಗಡೆ ಇದ್ರೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ರೇಷನ್, ಈ ತರ ತುಂಬಾ ಇದಾವೆ.
ಊಹೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಊಹೆ ಅಂತ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಆಗಿದ್ರೆ ಯಾವ್ದು ಊಹೆ ಅಂತ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ಬೇಕು, ಅದು ಗುರ್ತಿಡಿಬೇಕು. ನಾವು ಅದು ಗುರ್ತಿಡಿಯಕ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಬಟ್ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಮೀಟಿಂಗ್. He wants to say something.
Okay, and their children now. See, if I may clarify a bit, the quandary is with the ground reality. The ground reality is, so we are in a problematic situation to either say yes, go get it done, or don't, because you have raised a good number of points, which is the legal framework isn't in place and all those things of civil liberties and all that. But for them as a everyday operational aspect, they feel.
Answer that. See, we have this problem coming up every day in Delhi. I have people asking me every day, do I go? Don't want this.
Yeah, even it's recording. It's recording. Yeah, this is small enough.
Yeah.
No, it's
it's very disruptive to have this thing going up and down. No. Yeah. For instance, every day we have somebody asking this question in Delhi, but we get from different people. Now, what we generally said is that the burden of unraveling the problem of the UID cannot be put on the poor. That's out of question. Second thing is that this, see, if this were land or if it was some material, tangible thing where you see it being taken away from you, then it is much easier for people to understand what the problem is. It's much more difficult when it is something intangible. Like someone may track you, there might be convergence, there will be some silos being breached. You can't expect this as a popular movement against the thing. In fact, I think one of the huge mistakes that the government has made is in making this DBT thing the way they did and making it into a Congress plank, where for the first time people felt that they were not being given something, but something may be denied to them. And for the first time we heard Aadhar nahi sudhar chahiye, the first, the first slogan against the UID, because nobody bothered about it till then. You go get one ID and come, no problem. That's how it was. As far as definitely the people, the no to UID people, we are not asking the poor to take the burden of fighting this battle. That is neither fair nor practical, nor will they do it, and they should not do it. It's not their battle. So if they have to go and get a UID and they feel that that's the only way they can handle their lives, and very often for the poor it is true at this point, because they are being bullied and threatened into this.
There is something.
Yeah.
Just 1 minute, sorry interrupting.
No.
To help people like this, I am willing to do one thing. I have appeal pending in the High Court. If they are interested, I legally protect them. If they approach me by any means through people like you, I am willing to use my advocates to send a legal notice to the institution which is asking them to enroll and otherwise deny, just 1 minute, otherwise deny the service. And in many cases, this threat has worked. People who have come saying that the gas distributor is saying that if you don't have Aadhar, we will not give, immediately we send them a legal notice and they back out. Banks which are asking for this, we send them a legal notice. They immediately open the account. So the ladies, BBMP is asking them and not giving them textbooks or some such thing. If you can approach us, we will issue a legal notice to BBMP and immediately they back out. So I think we should encourage these people to resist it. I also want to give you the example. In the United Kingdom, schools started taking fingerprints of children for the purpose of attendance and health scheme and so on. The parents resisted it, they approached the government, and the government ruled that the schools cannot take the fingerprints or any other biometrics of children. So I think we should be action oriented, and this talk shop should then go into an action mode and we are willing to do that.
Okay. ಈಗ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾದ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಇದು ಕಾರ್ಡ್ ತೊಗೋಬೇಕಾ ಬೇಡ ಅನ್ನೋದಕ್ಕೆ 3 ಉತ್ತರ ಬಂತು. ಏನಂದರೆ ಇವರು UID ಅವರು ಇಲ್ಲ ನೀವು ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ತೊಗೊಳ್ಳಿ ಬೇಡ ಅಂದರೆ ಬೇಡಿ ಇದು ವಾಲಂಟ್ರಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಬಟ್ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ರೇಷನ್ ಮೂಲಕ ಅಥವಾ ಗ್ಯಾಸ್ ಮೂಲಕ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಸಿಗಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಆ ರೀತಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಆ ರೀತಿ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಹೆಸರಿಗೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ವಾಲಂಟ್ರಿ ಅಂತಾರೆ, ಬಟ್ ಹಿಂದ್ಗಡೆಯಿಂದ ಮ್ಯಾಂಡೇಟ್ರಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಉಷಾ ಅವ್ರು ಏನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಅಂದರೆ ಡೆಲ್ಲಿಲಿ ಯಾವಾಗಲೂ ಈ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಬಟ್ ಇದು ಬಡ ಜನರ ಹೋರಾಟ ಅಲ್ಲ. ನಾವು ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ನೀವು ನಿಮಗೆ ಸಬ್ಸಿಡಿ ಅಂದು ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ ಕಾರ್ಡ್ ತೊಗೊಳ್ಳಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ, ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಇದು ಅವ್ರ ಹೋರಾಟ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಎಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಕಡೆ ಸಮಾಜದಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾಗ್ತದೆ ಅಂದರೆ ನಮಗೆ ಬೇಡ ಅಂದರೂ ಅದನ್ನು ತೊಗೋಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇವ್ರೇನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಅಂದರೆ ಅವರು ಆಗಲೇ ಕೋರ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇಸ್ ನಡೆಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ. ಸೊ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಯಾರಾದರೂ ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಇದ್ದರೆ ನೀವು ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ, ಈಗ ಅಕಸ್ಮಾತ್ ಏನಾಗ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಕೆಲವ್ರ ಕಡೆ ರೂಲ್ ಬಂದಿದೆ. ಈಗ ರೇಷನ್ ಕಾರ್ಡೆಲ್ಲ ರೂಲ್ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಬಟ್ ಮೈಸೂರೆಲ್ಲ NREGL ರೂಲ್ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರೂ ಪಂಚಾಯತಿ ಅವರೇ ರೂಲ್ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ ಅಂತ ಅವ್ರವ್ರ ಪಾಡಿಗೆ ಯಾರ್ಯಾರು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಆ ರೀತಿ ನಿಮಗೆ ಡೌಟ್ ಇದ್ದರೆ ಇವ್ರನ್ನ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನಿಜವಾಗ್ಲೂ ರೂಲ್ ಇದೆಯಾ ಇಲ್ವಾ ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಇವ್ರು ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ನಿಮಗೆ ಕೋರ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ ಇದು ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೂ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ.
I will ensure
ಸ್ಕೂಲ್ ಬುಕ್ಸ್ ಬರಲ್ಲ, UID ತೆಗಿಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಗ್ಯಾಸ್ ಬರಲ್ಲ, UID ತೆಗಿಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ರೈಲ್ವೆ ಟಿಕೆಟ್ ಬರಲ್ಲ. ಅಂಥದ್ದು ಯಾವ್ದಾದ್ರು ಅವಕಾಶನಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ತೆಗಿಬಾರ್ದ ಅವಕಾಶನಲ್ಲಿ ಆಲೋಚನೆ ಇದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರನ್ನೇ ಕಾಂಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅವ್ರು ಒಂದು ಕೇಸ್ ಫೈಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ.
ಅಲ್ಲ ಕೇಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲ, he is saying that he will send a legal notice. ಸರ್ವಿಸ್ ಯಾರು ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ಲೀಗಲ್ ನೋಟಿಸ್ ಕಳಿಸಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹೆದರಿಕೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹೆದರಿಕೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ.
ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು ಇವಾಗ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾತ್ರನಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ನಾವು ರೇಷನ್ ಕಾರ್ಡ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ,
ರೇಷನ್ ಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ
ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಎಲ್ಲದಕ್ಕೂ
ರೇಷನ್ ಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಯಾರ್ಯಾರು ಕಡ್ಡಾಯ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ.
Will you help her with the ration card problem? Will you help her with all these problems?
Now we can do it.
Okay, we'll
start an NGO.
For instance, like my book for gas, no, refill, no, they said, no, what is your Aadhaar number? So can you wait for a legal battle and then there won't be gas at home, no?
No, yes, let me answer that question.
Just one sec, Matthew. If I can just say, because this is again the problem that we keep having, and I know you'll have more to say than I will, so I'll say the lesser and then you say more.
Please.
See, the thing is, where all of us are going wrong, and I think your neighbor certainly, it's very different for her and very different for your neighbor in one sense. It is illegal what they are asking, because the LPG is only linked up with subsidy. So when we go to with the LPG agency, you must ask certain basic questions, these questions that I was raising, about who will take liability, if my fingerprints don't work, what will happen? I may have a cut on my hand. How are you going to decide these things? Give me the answers to that. There has to be a responsiveness from that agency. And who will I hold liable if anything goes wrong in the handling of my biometrics with your agency? That, like Matthew says, that puts some fear into them about their using it. When it happened in the case that we know, when he went finally, the chap went to the LPG office and told them that, listen, these are all my questions, you answer me these questions. They said, no, this is not mandatory for you, it's only for people who are going to get subsidy. You don't have to give your UID number, we don't need a UID from you. So the one thing that I would say is, if we have some wherewithal, I think it's time to start asking questions and knowing what questions to ask. It's not about, it's not just between, will I get my UID, will I get my gas cylinder or not? How do I do it if I don't get the LPG? If I don't get the UID. So I'm saying that there is a responsibility in an educated middle class, at least to raise the right kind of questions with these agencies and make them respond. If we can't do it, who's going to make them respond? We can't ask people, you have 1,000 things to do for a domestic worker. You can't ask her to be going and fighting this battle. We can't make it nobody's battle. It's a middle class battle.
And we've got to fight. The person at the counter should understand.
There is no question. Listen, if someone comes and tells you, I feel like putting handcuffs on you, otherwise I won't give you LPG, will you accept? No, it's the same thing. This is actually not right. Second thing is that, and the second thing is that, see, one thing to remember is there are many people who've taken UID numbers. Then they say, oh, we've already taken it, what do we do? And you tell them, don't use it anywhere. At the lightest, now we use the voter ID and the driving license just so casually, wherever we go. Don't give that validity to the UID till UID earns its validity, if it ever does. It hasn't earned it so far. Why are we caving in then? Do we need to understand it at all or no? When somebody comes and bullies you and threatens you and says that, when they come and give you a voter ID card, they don't say, Buchandi, I'm going to scare the life out of you. You better come and get a voter ID card, right? They tell you, you can vote if you get the voter ID card. We are facilitating it. Please come, and I will come to you, and you can vote after that, and we won't interfere in your life after that. That's not what they are saying with the UID. Sorry.
Usha, but there's one other thing. What you said, if you make it just a middle class issue, or the resistance has to be from the middle class and not burden the poor. The problem would be in large numbers, if the large droves, if the poor enroll into it, that in itself makes the scheme and project successful because those many enrolled. What is needed is something like what Matthew is offering, a resistance which will help them to say we won't, only if we have that support group to be able to challenge it. If that doesn't happen,
the Jana Andolana is taking up these cases. Selva is taking up these cases, and we are also going now. Malleshwari and I will be going to Tumkur district to do a survey of the poor and also to explain to them the dangers of this thing and how they can ensure that they get the service without having to register it. To answer the lady's question on LPG, please understand, madam, they cannot stop giving you the cylinder. They cannot stop giving you the cylinder. And the only thing that Usha said, they may not give you the subsidy. Now the danger in trying to get that subsidy of 300 rupees, and which is 2,700 rupees a year, the danger in doing that is your bank account gets exposed. You're linking your bank account to your fingerprints, which can be faked. The moment you do that, you're exposing your bank account to fraud. So for 300 rupees a month, you want to do that or not, as a middle class person, the choice is yours. I believe that if you send a legal notice, they can never make it compulsory. You have a relationship with the gas company for 20 or 30 years. You have got consumer rights. They cannot suddenly introduce something and get this card or get that. They have signed a contract with you. When you give it
So Matthew, you can put that stuff down.
We'll take one more question and then get back to Anand's rest of the Anand's. Yeah.